So let's get to it. For our closing keynote speaker, he really needs no major introduction, but I think it's still worth sharing just a bit of his experiences and why we think he was the best person to close us out for the evening. So Jeff Johnson, he's an award-winning journalist, communications specialist, and thought leader. Currently, Johnson is a partner and chief of strategy for the Baltimore-based branding firm Illume Communications. In this role, he provides strategic insight and messaging consulting to clients in the private, public, and nonprofit sectors. Johnson has also maximized his expertise in communications, grassroots mobilization, political campaigns, youth engagement, and strategic consulting to create a unique career committed to developing solutions and systemic change. Beyond that, he was a former BET host and producer and an MSNBC contributor. Jeff has also served as national director for the Youth and College Division of the NAACP and has held an appointment by Russell Simmons as the vice president of the Hip Hop Summit Action Network. He currently provides regular content on TheRoot.com and the nationally syndicated Ricky Smiley Morning Show. Beyond that, Jeff has committed much of his time, both personally and professionally, to development of young people and continues to support youth leadership all over the country. And I think most importantly, he is an honored husband of Jacqueline and the proud father of Madison, Miles, and Malcolm. Without further ado, please welcome to the stage Jeff Johnson.
Good evening. That was loud, I'm sorry. I know that many of you have had a long day. I have had a long day as well, and so I hope that we will have as much of a discussion as we will me speaking. I am clearly the least intelligent person that has been before you today, but hopefully I will provide some level of practical recommendations as we talk about where do you all go from here. This has been, I believe that this is an important conference. I mean, frankly, I believe that it's important. Otherwise, I wouldn't have come for free on a day that I could be spending with my family. I mean, and let's just talk straight, right? I mean, all of us have things that we can do. And there are all kinds of conferences that take place all over the country. And all of us have to choose very carefully what we do with our time, where we spend our time and our energy. And I believe that the Black Policy Conference has consistently done a great job of bringing key issues to light, talking about them, creating a discourse that often isn't happening places, ensuring that people of color have a place to have these level of discourse. But the challenge anytime that we're in these kind of spaces is how do we move it from intellectual discourse to actual action, to mobilization, to making an impact. And that's hard for a lot of us, because most of us aren't necessarily plugged into infrastructure that has impact. We're plugged into infrastructure that has conversation. Hello? And we like that because it's easier. It's easier to sit around and have really interesting intellectual discourse and go home. It's really easy to show how smart we are. It's really easy to use great $500 words. It's great to be able to throw our degrees around. And it's great to be able to have this intellectual sparring with individuals that either believe or don't believe ideologically with what we believe. But it's a hell of a lot more difficult to take that, plug it into infrastructure, develop strategy, build teams, raise resources, begin to plug it into practical application that sometimes just doesn't work because social justice is hard. And then figuring out ways to continue to walk it out so that 2 to 3 years from now, you really begin to see policy shift taking place that changes the quality of people's lives, not just makes them engaged in socially conscious entertainment. So, in the 15 more minutes I have left, I want to throw out just 3 recommendations of things that I think we can do next, and then we can have conversation about it. I believe that so much of the conversation that we're having, and realizing that a lot of this conversation, regardless of whether we're talking about incarceration or if we're talking about education or if we're talking about jobs, if we're talking about whatever issue is our issue, still having this conversation through the lens of identity and race. I looked at the theme and I was like, for real? This is not Obama's America. This is Obama's term. This is our America. And he happens to be the president at this time. That doesn't take anything away from him. That's an indictment against his administration. But if we are saying that the America belongs to him, what does that say about the electorate and the population and citizens and entrepreneurs and teachers and parents who have to be as responsible as the president in framing what America looks like? And the challenge for me is that a whole lot of black folks have acted like it's Obama's America because they sat back and haven't done anything. And whether it is My Brother's Keeper, where you got a bunch of people waiting to get 2 pennies of 200 million that's supposed to go around the country. You got Negroes right now trying to create projects to get My Brother's Keeper money, when they don't understand that My Brother's Keeper is actually a brilliant opportunity to highlight the work that people are actually doing on the ground. And whether or not they get a penny, well, what happened is you've got a guy by the name of David Northcross in Oklahoma who runs a program called the OK program, but that for the last 15 years has been using former law enforcement officers to engage young men in public schools, where every time a young person comes into that program, none of them in 12 years has gotten arrested, has been killed, has not graduated from high school, has not gone on to college. But who talks about the OK program? Nobody. But the My Brother's Keeper initiative will illuminate, shine a light on programs that currently aren't getting any light, and allow foundations, allow individual donors, allow citizens to support quantifiable, metrics-driven, successful programs to get more light than some of the high-profile programs that don't have any metrics, don't have any data, but got shiny outsides and a celebrity promoting it, but doesn't have impact. It's not Obama's America. It's our America. And the moment that we as diasporic people would actually believe that, we would allow and challenge the president to do his job, and we would do ours. So how do we do that? My daughter and I were watching 12 Years a Slave. And she's 14. And she said to me after we watched it, and we were talking about this whole notion of what it means to be black in America in 2014. What does it mean for her to recognize that she is a descendant of slaves? What that means for our family by way of identity, and what that means for us as a community by way of how we treat each other, how we see each other within a global context, and the responsibility that we have to our community and our people. And she said, Dad, why don't people talk about the fact that we have been out of slavery less than half the time we were in it? And after patting myself on the back for having a brilliantly insightful 14-year-old, I said, baby, it's a great conversation because we aren't talking about what we have been able to do in spite of white supremacy. And we can have that conversation without pretending like white supremacy doesn't exist. So the whole notion of post-racial America tries to wipe away white supremacy. But if we can have the conversation about what we've been able to do, it takes us to my first point, which is the people in this room in particular and the people that are involved in these kind of discussions have got to stop denying their privilege within the context of social justice. Hello? Privileged Negroes at Harvard. Negroes at Harvard on a Friday and Saturday having intellectual conversation about policy issues are privileged. And you're privileged because of where you go to school. You're privileged because of the conversations that you have access to. You're privileged because of what this experience has been able to do for you. And I'm not even talking about what your socioeconomic level is. I know that the family that I came from didn't have no money. But I know that I was born overseas. I'm the third generation of members of my family that have traveled abroad. I'm the first in 3 generations not to have a master's degree. And I recognize that that is privilege because I understand as I look at the families of those around me, what those experiences and realities have allowed me to provide not only for myself, but for my daughter. And the challenge when you ignore your privilege in the face of very real white supremacy is you fail to acknowledge and access your own power within the process of bringing about social change. So the resources you have at your disposal, the access that you have, the perspective that you have is real. But if you keep talking about white supremacy and not dealing with your own privilege, then you're ignoring the power you have to actually change and bring about a change in the social justice issues that you care about. Well, let me go a little bit further. If you are understanding how many people you know, what those people know, who they know, what resources they have. I just spent doing a strategy session with a young lady who's running for office in Ohio, a woman by the name of Nina Turner. And Nina Turner is running for Secretary of State in the state of Ohio. Nina probably has the best chance of winning of all the members of the ticket of the Democratic Party. And in a state like Ohio, that doesn't make any sense, because there has never been a Democrat that is black that has won statewide in the state of Ohio. There's only been 2 Republicans, and one won twice. So you've got a terrible gubernatorial candidate. You've got weak candidates on the rest of the ticket. You have this African-American woman who every time she opens her mouth, she sounds like she's preaching, that has the ability to potentially become Secretary of State, but she can't raise money in Ohio. Now, my problem with this is that name me a Democratic candidate who wants to run in 2016 that doesn't need Ohio to win. Now, who in the hell that's going to be a Democratic candidate for president in 2016 wants to go into Ohio with a Republican Secretary of State, in a state that has already proven that it is willing at every possible moment to turn back voting rights and access to the polls? But now we're dealing with white supremacy. We are dealing with the reality that if there was a white boy that was running for Secretary of State, there would be money flowing in from all over the Democratic Party to be able to support him and lift him up as the person that was going to save Ohio for them. But if that's where Nina lived, it'd be a whole lot of money we'd be leaving off the table. And so we've got meetings set up for her in New York. We've got meetings set up for her in Los Angeles. We've got meetings set up for her in Atlanta. We've got meetings set up for her in Dallas, all with white Democratic donors who have come from a list of individuals that people around her know who don't have the money to max out themselves, but through their relationships and their experiences and their privilege have connection to individuals that can write checks that will change this entire campaign. That's leveraging privilege in a way that often we don't, because we spend so much time talking about what they're not doing for us and what they're not going to do for us and the reality of white supremacy. Because please don't get me wrong. Please do not think that I'm trying to erase it in the name of the little bit of privilege that we do have. I'm saying, how do we leverage that privilege to be able to fight that very white supremacy? The second thing, because I went on too long with that, is the battles that we need to fight in 2014, in my opinion, are less and less at the federal level. And I think that as we continue to walk out the methodology of a previous generation the fights that we're having have less and less impact because we're losing on both the federal level and the state level. And with the makeup of the Congress that we have now, and potentially will have for at least the next 8 years, and with the level of aggressiveness that we're seeing of state policy by the GOP, local policy. In the last 2 years, the Tea Party has elected over 30 people to school boards in the state of North Carolina. Understanding that they have the ability to control curriculum, process, how teachers are hired, what kids get what, where resources go, and the power that is there to be able to shift public policy and thus how young people are educated is intense. And we've got folks that aren't running anybody for school board, let alone for state legislature, let alone for statewide races. And so in states all over the country, we are seeing the tide turn back on policy, and we're still trying to fight similar battles at the federal level. I think one of the examples is the Voting Rights Act, and we will probably have a lot of debate on this. I think it makes zero sense to fight for new federal Voting Rights Act. I don't think it makes sense. I don't think it makes sense in a day and time where the battles that we're losing are not at the federal level. The fact that Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act was removed did nothing for people that were living in Ohio. And people in Ohio had dealt with some of the most egregious voter disenfranchisement over the last decade. But we understood we were never covered under Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. The Voting Rights Act was an incredibly meaningful piece of legislation when it was passed. But decade after decade, it became less and less relevant to the places that were dealing with voter fraud, voter disenfranchisement, voter intimidation. And so you had teeth in certain places in the country, but we didn't do enough proactive work to modify the law before it got removed. So now is not the time to try to bring it back. Now is the time to raise hell in Ohio, in North Carolina, in Florida, in South Carolina, in Georgia, in Nevada, in Arizona, in the places where you're seeing incredibly aggressive moves to reduce early voting, to shut off Sunday voting, to increase voter ID, to increase the barriers to going to the polls versus removing the barriers to going to the polls. But you will have folks all day long who tell me I'm out of my mind because Negroes need to be working with a congressional black caucus that doesn't have any power in the Congress anyway to bring about legislation that's not going to get passed when you could be mobilizing at the state level with people that have to listen to be able to turn back a policy that they're trying to get passed within the next 12 months. Not that was already passed a year ago and supported by the Supreme Court. Mobilize on the state level in real ways, using college students as the new mobilization mechanism. Because so many college students don't trust the NAACP, don't trust the Urban League, don't trust traditional institutions or organisms, and that's okay. They don't have to. But they do have to create some level of institution for themselves. They do have to be trained. Because one of the things that I've seen that's the biggest challenge is training. I love the Dream Defenders, and I love what the Dream Defenders are doing. I love some of the work that I see of college students and young people mobilizing against issues at the local level, state level, and federal level. But what I see very seldom is real training on how to do social justice work. I see passion. I see commitment. I see willingness to work, but I don't see training. And that lack of training, and I'm not talking about training in college to be able to understand the depth of the issues and be able to pontificate what some of the policy recommendations should be. I'm talking about, do you know how to hit the street and mobilize people? Do you know how to create a sustained movement? Do you know how to do more than create a campaign? Because most of what we've seen is, at best, sophisticated media campaigns or unsophisticated grassroots campaigns that last about a weekend to 3 months, but don't go any further than that. So everybody and their mama changed their avatar to put a hoodie on and did a Facebook picture with a bag of Skittles and some iced tea. But did not go home and address issues of stand your ground or self-defense law reform in the state they lived in. Troy Davis, I am Troy Davis t-shirts all over the country. People standing out of the courthouse in Washington, D.C. People coming in from out of town to stand at the Supreme Court in Washington, D.C. Went home and can't tell you who's on death row. So they were meaningful campaigns. I'm not taking anything away from Amnesty, from the NAACP, from any other organization that fought for Troy Davis or fought for Trayvon Martin. What I'm saying is that ain't no damn movement when you don't go home and do the same thing. And what we need to see is young people being given training to be able to walk out substantive social justice movements, not just be able to scientifically and sophisticatedly dissect policy recommendation. The last thing is, can we, in a real way, at least a few of us, stop playing checkers and start playing chess? And by that I mean, we have a lot of soldiers in different spaces. We have a good number of generals in a lot of spaces. We don't have a lot of architects. And by that I mean, when I think about, how many of you all remember when you first started hearing about the birth of the religious right, not as an ideology, but as an institution? Right? And so we're really talking about somewhere around 1990. Again, not as an ideology, as an institution. And I've got the organizing video. They did a bootleg organizing video in 1990. And when I say bootleg, I mean bootleg. I mean a dude sitting at a folding table talking about what they wanted to do over the next 5 years. And they said, what we want to do is we will target talk radio hosts who believe what we believe, and we will feed them our messages, and they will be our messengers. We will identify these 5 states that have state legislatures with folks that lean towards our ideological leanings. We will then put offices in those 5 states. We will hire state directors whose responsibility will be to engage students and other partners. Here is the corporate side, where we have 5 corporate CEOs and other wealthy individuals that will fund this. We got this guy that's going to fund something that ultimately will become Fox News. Now, as bootleg as the video looked, the strategy was incredibly pragmatic. And within 15 years, so from 1990 to 2005, they had the White House, the Congress, the Senate, and the Supreme Court. And I don't mean they owned it. I mean that they had enough influence within each to be able to control the policy that came out of it and the direction of the Supreme Court. Now, the problem was they were crazy, and they didn't have the ability to maintain it. But what I'm wondering as we talk about this whole notion of black identity, and what I see around the country is black folks who want to have this kumbaya moment where all of us get together, sit around the campfire, hold hands, and all agree before we move. And to hell with that. I would love for as much of us to be able to get along as can get along, but I want to win. And I want to win the policy battle, and I want to win the power battle. And the way you win the power battle is not by waiting for everybody to get along. It's, can you get together with the people that believe what you believe at multiple levels? Understanding, oh my God, the novel idea that we can't all do it ourselves. So there are policy folks, there are grassroots activists, there are elected officials, there are business people. There is an ecosystem of social justice, not some echo chamber. And we so caught up in the echo chamber, we just show up and give speeches, that we're not building an ecosystem that understands that people exist within it, coming with their talent, ability, and purpose. And when they contribute that talent and ability, everybody ain't got to know about it, but it still benefits the ecosystem. It's like the Matrix, right? Because I'm so tired of us having press conferences for meetings. If you Google Congressional Black Caucus and the president, the last 2 or 3 meetings that the Congressional Black Caucus has had with the president, as soon as they come out, they have a press conference. And normally at the press conference, they say, we had a very productive meeting with the president. He listened to our concerns, and we felt heard. Have a good day. Now, why is that worthy of a press conference? It's worthy of a press conference because you ain't got no damn strategy. Because if you had a strategy, you would understand that you don't have to have a press conference to be effective. You just have to do the work. How many of you all seen The Matrix? The movie The Matrix. Okay, so for those of you that haven't seen it, sorry. The beautiful thing about Morpheus and Neo and the crew was that they understood that the job was to defeat the machines. But in defeating the machines, they didn't run around the damn Matrix shaking people saying, "You in the Matrix." Because they realized that they could not convince people who were in the Matrix that they were in the Matrix. What is my point? My point is, do the work with the people that understand what the work is. Create spaces that are private, that are underground, where you're building relationships that are sophisticated and networks that don't need to be on your LinkedIn page or your Facebook page or your Twitter friends, so that you have the ability to have private allies and public enemies, so that we can play the kind of power game that other people play with us. Because it is Machiavellian. And we do need people that understand what power looks like. And we do need at least a small group of individuals that can say, wait a minute, if I want to have impact in the area of public education, then I understand that there are several things that have to happen in order for that impact to take place. First of all, I need somebody with money. Well, that person with money doesn't have to be damn LeBron James or Oprah Winfrey. It has to be somebody, regardless of race, that understands and believes in my policy agenda. And so often we so caught up in white supremacy that we don't realize it's some white folks that have the same ideological leanings that we do, and some black folks that's going to get in the way. Can you build with the people that get it to raise the resources so that you have a pool of funds that, without a press conference, without naming an organization, without telling everybody what you're doing, you have the ability to fund these 5 people in media space who for the next 3 years will go hard on messages around Common Core or school choice and be very clear about what that means? Do you have the ability to fund the building of educational institutions that don't spit in the face of public education, but create a model for what public education can look like? Can you have teachers that in and outside of the union that are willing to push messages of protecting teachers' jobs without necessarily supporting negative aspects of a union? How do you create whatever it is you believe in? How do you create the space as opposed to just play in it? How do you affect and impact it without just showing up and surfing the wave of it? And so if we can do those things, if we can acknowledge our privilege and leverage it, if we can go hard within these states, if we can mobilize and create training opportunities to build not just sophisticated but sustainable grassroots mobilization, not just of traditional organizations but of new organizations, and if some of us, at least on a small level, can play serious chess games that are about maneuvering resources, both financial and otherwise, to build infrastructure that doesn't currently exist, so we're not constantly looking at foundations that can never fund our work forever to fund our work, or institutions that will never be fully invested in the empowerment of our community, asking them to be invested in the empowerment of our community. If we don't do, no community is more powerful than the institutions that were designed to serve it. But where are ours? And somebody's got to start playing that chess game behind the scenes of galvanizing resources to build infrastructure that ensures sustainable movement takes place and that there's real shifts in power versus just shifts in diversity and inclusion. I was with a bunch of young people, young leaders in Brussels 2 weeks ago for the Brussels Forum. And one of the conversations was about this whole notion of electing black members of parliament. Electing black members of parliament within the EU and also electing black members of parliament within national parliaments. And there was a diplomat, a UN diplomat that was answering the questions, and one young person said, well, wait a minute. When are we going to be honest about the fact that electing black people into these positions doesn't necessarily mean a shift in power? It means there's inclusion. It means that there is a person there. But ask Mandela and ask Obama. Did the first black mean that there was a fundamental shift of power and resources that changed in a real meaningful way. And please don't, I'm not saying that there was not an impact. I'm not saying that there have not been wins. I'm not saying that the black community hasn't found places to be better in either country. I'm saying that the election of one or two individuals, the hiring of a black CEO, the hiring of a black chancellor or president at an institution does not shift power. And if we're not talking about shifting power, what are we talking about? Questions?
Where do we start?
Wherever you want.
Here. I think that it's important for us to always remember that it takes one person to push things through and bring folks along. And when we have conferences like this where we have a lot of intellectual and lofty conversation, that we really got to bring it back down to things that we can actually do as an individual. I know as a teacher, I spent a lot of time putting myself in front of young black students and just bearing myself as a black man and taking the impact of there's no man in my life. I don't like what you're saying. It's very hard for folks to mobilize. How do we mobilize?
So let's break it down even further. How do we mobilize where, around what?
Let's pick something.
You asked the question.
Mass incarceration.
And obviously, mass incarceration is a huge issue in itself. I think and most of us can point to people that are doing some incredible work around mass incarceration. So whether it's around reentry, whether it's around policy as it relates to incarceration around drugs, and this drug piece is going to be real interesting in the next 12 months in particular, because there is now this happy-go-lucky feeling about marijuana. And white folks are tiptoeing through the tulips about legalized marijuana and how great, no, seriously, legal marijuana is now, you would think, that it's not still illegal in most places. And the feeling around marijuana has shifted so much that people are acting like it's a foregone conclusion within the next 5 years. It'll probably be legal nationally. Everybody, you got elderly folks feeling good about it. You got folks saying they're giving it to their kids. I mean, it's insane. How many black men and women right now are spending the night in jail over marijuana possession? And so there's some real issues around what policy is going to look like by way of freeing people from jail, by way of releasing people for something that is no longer illegal. And I think the opportunity to be able to see nonviolent drug offenders being released who have marijuana violations, if you are now going to say that marijuana is legal, if this is now going to happen. And obviously, we're dealing with the nonviolent drug offender piece anyway. So I think that's an area where we've got some national news media relevance to be able to build movement around it. And sometimes when you're talking about building movement, that's an easy place to start. It's not where you stop. But it's a place to begin to pull people in because you've got so much conversation about legalized marijuana. What does that now mean for those that are in court right now on marijuana possession charges, not to distribute, but just possession charges, who are going to get time for possession without intent to distribute, who are going to get time for possessing small amounts and still not committing a violent crime. So I think, to answer your question, I think we identify the space where we can galvanize individuals around something that's hot. Because frankly, that's how it has to. I don't think it's ever been any different. I mean, if there's a hot, relevant issue, you've got the ability to mobilize people around it. There's a window of opportunity to do it, and there's ways that it has to be done. And so I think that to deal with incarceration, that can be a starting point. Where you got the ability to be able, there are enough notable folks, because I don't want to say celebrities all the time, because celebrities aren't the answer to everything. But they're folks with credibility and note that would be willing to speak on the issue, to be concrete messengers, both on the policy recommendation side and on the engaging people into the movement side. I think that there are enough states that are already moving towards legalization, where in looking at those legalization policy recommendations, there's options to also talk about how do we deal with those that are currently incarcerated and those that are currently in the pipeline to be incarcerated. I think that there are enough college students that are just dying to find something to do. No, seriously, I cannot go to a city or a state where I can't point to at least 1,000 college students that want to be involved in some kind of movement but don't necessarily know how to be involved. And if we can create 3 very simple engagement strategies. So we know that our goal is to see policy passed that speaks to those that are currently incarcerated, and what does that mean as you begin to legalize marijuana. Then the second and third policies can be more broadly about incarceration. How are we dealing with issues of reentry? How are we dealing with issues of training while people are incarcerated? And all those are policy-related issues, right? So that we can begin to look at states where you have more progressive attorney generals that are actually looking at reinstituting educational opportunities, entrepreneurship opportunities. I just saw somewhere, and I wish I would have made note of it, there was an article about cats doing entrepreneurship pitches inside the prison. And these are lifers. So these cats may never actually get out to do this business, but they're allowing them within this prison to be able to use the business acumen they had on the outside to develop viable legal business ideas inside. And while some of the cats that are getting out are taking those businesses and running with them, a lot of these cats are doing it just because they love it. But how much better is that than just believing I'm supposed to be warehoused? There's a brother in North Carolina that's doing entrepreneurship for previously incarcerated folks. So as soon as they're coming out, he's identifying venture capitalists and looking at areas where they can be able to build businesses and realizing that many of them have Wharton Business School level business concept understanding, even though what they did was illegal. So I think that there are multiple ways to deal with it. I think one is to deal with what's the hot issue, how do we mobilize around it, and use that as a bridge to connect people to other areas. 2, how do we deal with folks that are currently in and policy as it relates to what happens in jails right now. 3, how do we deal with the reentry piece, and not dealing with reentry just from the standpoint of previously incarcerated folks. One of the biggest issues of reentry is us. So we'll go hard on the system about what they don't do for brothers and sisters when they're locked up or when they get out. But we aren't as welcoming as we could be. We aren't finding jobs that aren't just in construction or housing retrofitting for brothers and sisters when they come out. And so many of our church ministries are just about going in, singing a song, and praying. Versus about dealing with the real psychological wellness needs of men and women that are incarcerated. So I think that there are some broad, and those are doable things, right? Those are things that we can start doing. Some of us can talk to our pastor tomorrow about shifting what our prison ministry looks like. How are we creating partnership with the mental health field? And many of us know that there's politics around that too. So how much you can do inside the prison is very much depending on where you are, who the warden is, who's in the state legislature, who the governor is, what the policies are. And so the difficulty of that will vary location to location. But it doesn't mean we can't begin to push and make those kind of recommendations to shift our own thinking about how we engage, not just around incarceration policy, but around the actual incarcerated. Did I answer your question? All right. Are y'all passing the mic? Okay.
Oh, thank you. I'm Michelle Wilson. I work at EPA. And I have a question about justice in a way that seems much less urgent, but really isn't. And that's environmental justice. I think you live in Baltimore, or you used to, where everyone's father or uncle used to work at Bethlehem Steel. that's a Superfund site. And a lot of us live near Superfund sites. A lot of us live near a factory, something like that. So I'm interested in your thoughts on that.
I think it is an urgent issue. And that's why I said I think we create these ecosystems of social justice, because so often we beat people up for the issue that they choose to address, versus realizing that we all have a special calling to whatever our passion is. But I do think the environmental piece is an issue. And whether it's sanitation issues in the Bronx, as it relates to landfills and how garbage is picked up, or whether it's power lines, or whether it's anything else. So I think it's there. I think one, and the easiest place to start is information campaigns. And that doesn't mean that because you have an information campaign that means 20,000 people are tomorrow going to show up and start being environmentalists. I think Green for All has done a great job as a large-scale national organization, and I know they do a lot of work with the EPA. But I think that there's some other local activists that are doing good jobs. And so I think we should look at what are the potential entry points for people around environmental justice. And again, look at some of the reactive kind of mobilization and some of the proactive kind of mobilization. So some of the proactive mobilization is what people are doing all over the country with urban gardens. So how are we using urban gardens to take up space in urban communities that isn't particularly being used, creating green space, creating economic opportunities to do straight to sale of produce, and giving people either co-op opportunities or entrepreneurship opportunities right there in the inner city. How do we begin teaching young people to start gardens at home and at school? So those are kind of real 5 foot off the ground, baseline kind of opportunities. But the other thing is, how do we then use either churches, civic organizations, fraternities and sororities, not to make it the issue of the fraternity or sorority or the issue of the church, to say how many people here care about the environment? Great, you too. Now, let's get you two together with the 2 people from the Deltas, the 2 people from the Black MBAs, the 2 people from Mount Sinai, the 2 people from here, and start creating some local committees that are committed to environmental justice. And not environmental justice in the typical EJ way, because I think the EJ community turns off a lot of people of color, because it's overwhelmingly white. How they mobilize isn't necessarily culturally relevant to how we mobilize. And so I think there are some great partners within the EJ community, but how they mobilize isn't necessarily how we mobilize. And then lastly, I think that we begin to engage small business owners who are going to benefit from everything from renewable energy and new energy sources to cleaner environments, who aren't necessarily always affected by some of the regulatory issues that are going to affect some of the policy that's going to come about, is that to get them to be, because a lot of times we deal with this from the moral perspective versus the economic impact perspective. And I think the environmental justice movement in particular has a lot of ground to gain by dealing with economic impact, not just morality. So it's not just about cleaning up the world or our community because we should, or because we should save the planet, or because we should conserve. There's money to be made in doing some of this work. And I don't think that we should be beyond helping people make money in areas that will actually advance some of this policy. So I think those are a couple of ways. But I think you've got to start with the education piece, because there's just so few of us that really even understand the nuances of what the environmental justice or any other, because it's not just, you got the EJ community, and then you've got the global warming community, and then you've got these other kind of nuances of the same space. Most of us don't get that. We don't know who those folks are, and they're not necessarily coming to look for us to engage in the movement. Some are, and they're beginning to do more and more, but a whole lot of them are just a bunch of wealthy white folks that aren't talking about, they rather save whales than clean communities. And so we've got to be able to make the narrative about practical people and environmental justice, not just about super wealthy, privileged people and environmental justice.
Okay, well, I have the mic, so I'll ask the question. Thank you, Jeff, for coming back again. You said really important things. You mentioned North Carolina, and as far as I understand, North Carolina was a battleground for a larger national war, and money was the weapon of choice. So I guess I'm wondering, after, and you can correct me if I'm understanding this wrong, but this is what I've heard, and I'm wondering, after the Citizens United case first, and then the McCutcheon's case, which just happened, I'm wondering how we can protect our communities against the attacks are inevitable. So you mentioned the school board, and I think that's probably just going to happen more and more. So I'm just wondering what you see in terms of a national strategy for that.
I think we fight the party while we join the party. And so there's got to be fundamental discussion around campaign finance. But we keep losing the battle. And so as we keep losing the battle, it doesn't mean we don't stop fighting it, but it does mean, why aren't we creating super PACs? So I was a part of a super PAC in Ohio during 2012 called Black Men Vote. And we raised $3 million just for Ohio. And the goal was to turn out 18 to 36-year-old black men, period. Non-traditional 18 to 36-year-old black voters. We raised $3 million from about 4 donors. And we killed the airwaves. And in fact, we even won an award for one of our ads that straight up called Romney a liar. Like through the whole ad, it's just calling him a liar. He says something, we say liar. He says something else, we say liar. He says something else, we say liar. But that wasn't the brilliant piece that we did. The brilliant piece was creating pools of mini grant money for local community folks who could quantify their ability to mobilize people to the polls. And so one of the most effective groups was the Somali community in Columbus. And so we understand these homogeneous communities really have the ability to mobilize folks in ways that the church doesn't. Amen. So the small amount of money that we gave to the Somali community, they moved 45,000 people to the polls. Yes, 45,000 people to the polls. And we only had talked to 3 people, right? And the money was less than the money we gave to the preachers, who moved about 12 people. The other thing that the Super PAC gave us the ability to do is things that the campaign wouldn't. And so we did GOTV ads at the strip club. Someone's excited. So we got 2 chains. We got 2 chains to record one line that said, if you baller enough to make it rain, you baller enough to vote. That was it. And they would play that line in between sets, if you understand what a set is. And so it wasn't some deep intellectual geopolitical message about why you need to go to the polls and vote and what the policy implications are. It was like, look, if you this much of a baller here, be this much of a baller everywhere. And we had a 20% increase in black male voters 18 to 36 in Ohio in 2012 versus 2008. 20%. And many of you know that we saw increased numbers of African-American voters in certain precincts from 2008 to 2012. But we know, I mean, the night of the election, we had members of the Obama campaign in Ohio come and saying thank you. Anybody that was in Ohio heard those ads. And so my point is, why not play the game until the policy gets changed? If we've got $1 trillion in spending power and we've got access to resources, it's not as if there aren't wealthy folks in and outside of our community that don't want to see impact in elections. But so often we don't develop sophisticated strategy and then we don't pitch it to the right people. And so there's the ability, I don't agree with it, but I'm going to use it until it's no longer there, because I know they are. And if they're going to spend $12 million, I'm going to try to raise 4. Because I know that with 4, sometimes we can have the same level of impact that they can with 12 in our community. And so it's not about dollar for dollar. It's about how do we use the dollars. So I disagree with it totally. I think that it is incredibly prejudiced the process. I think that Citizens United in particular had killed us. I think that these independent expenditure committees are all bad, and at the same time, I'm working for Ready for Hillary, an independent expenditure committee that raised $4 million for Hillary Clinton in December. $4 million in December for a person that's not a candidate. It's ridiculous. It's terrible. It shouldn't be happening. But until it's no longer the law, we should work the hell out of it.
I have the mic, so. Hi, everyone. My name is Kimberly Dowdell. I'm an architect from Detroit, actually, and I know Detroit has been getting Detroit has been getting a lot of press, especially after the bankruptcy. But everyone knows that a lot of the issues that are happening in our urban cores all over the country, even the world, but particularly in the country, there's just so many issues. And Detroit sort of has a lot of the just sort of most profound, deeply. Serious issues. So I'm actually starting at the Kennedy School in the fall to sort of start to figure out how to pair that with, my design background. But I'm just curious if you could talk a little bit about Detroit specifically, but just our cities in general and how we can start to work across, sector lines to make an impact.
Yeah, I mean, if I had to answer to that, I would not be here for free. I was with the sister who was the first Latino city councilwoman from Detroit. She was at the Brussels Forum, and we were talking about a lot of those issues, and so many of those issues are Detroit's issues are just different. No, very seriously. I mean, if you don't understand Detroit, it's not just about poverty and an economic downturn and a shift in an industry that was the sole industry and created supply chain. It's about really having a state of Michigan that hates the city of Detroit and a state government that wants to manipulate Detroit and is doing so through controlling their government, through holding back funds. And you all may know the number better than I do, but I mean, there's a couple of tens of millions of dollars that the state of Michigan owes to the city of Detroit that they said they would not pay to them because they don't trust Detroit's leadership. Now, I never knew whether you trusted somebody's leadership or not being the litmus for whether you pay back what you owe. So there's a lot of issues there, but I think that one of the challenges that mayors are facing, and if there's anywhere that we can really begin to dive deep on thinking in an innovative way, is just looking at shifting industry and where are really trying to define what our cities want to be. What do they want to create? What do they want to be known? How do we build industry sectors? I think Pittsburgh is a good example of that. I grew up in Cleveland, and so being in that Midwest corridor, you understood the steel and auto industry was what all of our grandparents moved there for. I mean, my grandfather moved from Columbus, Georgia, to Cleveland, Ohio, because the Ford plant opened. How do we recreate that? Not with one industry, but multiple industries. And it doesn't just have to be tech. So it doesn't just have to be STEM. STEM provides a ton of opportunity, but STEM also means that you got to have the workforce at the same time that you have the job creation. So there's no simple answers for, I think the hardest political job there is an urban mayor, because you just never win. If the schools get fixed, crime is bad. If crime goes down, jobs are low. I mean, there's always something there, and all of these issues are connected. But I think thinking innovatively about how to build small business, how to create industry opportunities, how to build those industries over time, where the areas are regionally. And I think many of us have seen some of the most effective ways for cities to be able to benefit is not necessarily from that city themselves, but from broader regional strategies. So Gary, Indiana in particular, that has just traditionally been horrible, I think is benefiting more from a regional strategy. And so some of the resources that exist in the surrounding cities of Gary are now investing in seeing Gary come up because they understand that creates more strength for the region. And that goes beyond your traditional county, state, municipal lines and starts dealing with the ecosystem question, right? If you've got this city over here that is failing, these 3 cities over here are never going to be as effective as they can be. Now, they will do every political maneuver they can to create a proverbial wall between one and another. And Cleveland State University School of Urban Affairs just did a great study on easts. So all of these East Cleveland, East St. Louis, when you look at all of these east, they are perpetually poverty zones. They are perpetually underemployed. They are perpetually undereducated. And Cleveland right now is dealing with whether to annex East Cleveland altogether, because there's just no possible way that East Cleveland is going to be able to pull themselves out of the economic place they are. But there's no simple answer to that. I mean, I think there has to be, and you all have probably talked about this the last 2 days, I mean, there have to be really sophisticated relationships between the private sector and the public sector. I think we need to do a better job of electing public officials. I was with the mayor of Lexington, Kentucky, and he was a white guy, 3rd-generation entrepreneur, and he said something that was just really simplistically profound. He said, my dad always told me that public service was just that. And he said, I felt like I had to go into the private sector and learn something about business before I could come back and add value to the city. I think too often we got folks running that just want a position, but don't necessarily have a quantifiable skill set to bring to it, which does 2 things. It means they don't know how to be innovative within the space, and they're susceptible to corruption. So how do we begin to change what the feeder pool is for people running for office, getting a greater skill set, but also working from the other direction, which is how do places like this become incubators for candidates? How many of you all are running? And let's take it a step lower, right? Because I am longing for the day when we see more and more youngins from the block running for office. So how you get that shorty off the block to be philosophizing, right? And teach them that his philosophizing is the same as this guy's political platform. Because when you philosophizing, you mad. You're mad about stuff going on, and you may not have the same kind of vocabulary to be able to communicate it, but you understand what's wrong, and you understand some of the potential solutions that can fix it. I want to teach these babies that what they're angry about and what they see and the ideas they have are the same as the platform as some of these people that are being groomed by the young Republicans and the young Democrats. I want to take them and get their record expunged the way they be doing for them. Amen. Then I want you to incubate them. Take their boy who got their back ride or die and teach him to be a campaign manager. Take their homegirl that's the only one of the 3 of them that got any money and make her the finance director. Take their boy that's on Facebook 32 hours a day and make him the technology director. Take their homegirl to be passing out party leaflets for the party and make her the organizer of volunteers. Incubate them in a system that gives them a stipend so they don't have to hustle, and then connect them to community infrastructure that will fund them for local campaigns and change the feeder pool for school board, for even state legislature or city council races. And it doesn't mean that it's going to happen in a city like Chicago or a city like New York, where you've got just such a powerful local infrastructure that it's hard for anybody to break through it. But in a city like Cleveland or Youngstown or Charlotte, for that, well, Charlotte, Jesus Christ, or some of these B or C level cities, we can really begin to see some impact. And that's what we've seen the Tea Party do. So there's a lot to your question. And I think that there's some good people that are starting to do some work around it in some of those small targeted areas. I think the mayor of the city of Cleveland, if you Google Cleveland's education reform plan, there's a hell of a lot of work that they need to do. But they've been able to bring every single member of the community together in spaces that are normally arguing and never getting to a place of agreement to determine what a plan would be, and then got the citizens to approve a levy for the first time in 18 years as a result of seeing everybody come to the table. So, you know, when we're talking about urban cities, we're talking about how are we dealing with crime, how are we dealing with education, how are we dealing with economic development, how are we dealing with industry, so on and so forth. And each of those has a plan, but at some point, the right hand has to know what the left hand is doing. And I wish I had some better examples of cities that I think are getting it right by way of doing that, but I think Pittsburgh is a good example of a city that was just knee-deep in the steel industry, suffered for a long time, and then recreated itself as a tech city. Because Austin is different in that regard, right? They were always a university capital city town. Pittsburgh remade themselves, and through connection with the universities, as well as industry, is just doing an amazing job in now being a tech city versus a steel city. Thank you all so much. There one more question? One more question.
Two more? Two more. Yeah, he wants to ask a question as well. He's been waiting like.
I'm not in control.
Sorry, he's been waiting really patiently, so he should go next. One more? Two more?
How about I just give shorter answers?
Oh, that works too. So earlier you were speaking about college students need to get more training on how to mobilize people and to sustain a movement. And I was wondering if you could operationalize that concept a little bit more, because I don't really know what to do other than to academically study these older movements, these movements from the past that have happened. So I was wondering if you could be more specific about what that looks like. And also if he can go next to ask a question, yeah.
Yeah, so you highlighted the state and local government, municipalities, and what type of role they play in impact. I wanted to basically wonder why there hasn't been a lot of attention brought forth in regards to the influence that state and local politicians play in regards to allocation of capital or some policy that affects the community directly. And I can more so speak for New York and DC. Like, I wasn't aware of the community boards within New York till I moved there and actually started a non-for-profit there. But I feel like young professionals are not even connected to them. A lot of times they know where the bones are buried and things of that nature. So,
short answer is money. And so there's a hell of a lot more money put at the federal level into engagement than there is at the state and local level. And we got to stop playing that game. And I think both parties are going to realize that they have to start doing that because they're losing so many battles at the state level. So I think we're going to see that shift, but the money investment hasn't caught up with the impact. Really quickly, three things as it relates to college mobilization. And I think clearly you're right. I mean, I was a black student union president. I was a student government president at a predominantly white institution. I was at the NAACP. I think that the formulas are no different for us than they were for our predecessors. It's the methodology that shifts. And so I think the first thing always is, what is the issue? What is the issue that we want to impact? And two, what is the impact? And I'll tell you, so often I have conversations with folks and they can tell you what the issue is. They can't tell you what the impact is. And then what does that impact make the ecosystem look like? So if we get this legislation passed, what does that do? What does it create? What reality now exists? And just understanding those things first. Then, after we've done that, I think it's very important that because many of you are students, and so you've done the research on the historical impact of the issue. You know how we've gotten there. But so many young people don't. They think the issue happened in the last 5 minutes because they've only been here for 4. So how do we ensure through a training process that we understand the nuances of the historical context of these issues and all the work that has been done by people to be able to create the impact in the same areas we want to have impact? What have been the successes and failures? Then, who is the target? And be very clear with that. I mean, and this is like basic stuff, but I see more people marching against folks that can't change what you marching about. Like, even on a social level, y'all remember Enough is Enough campaign that was mobilizing around BET? They were marching around Deborah Lee's house twice a week. Really well-meaning people. Love them. God bless them. They was going hard. I mean, I'm talking about 200-300 people marching around Deborah Lee's house every week. I don't even know if she was home. And they were marching around Deborah Lee's house drinking Dasani water. when Coke was paying for the damn show that they was marching about. When Deborah Lee talks to Philippe from Comcast about whether or not she's doing her job, he's not asking how many people got educated. He's asking what were the ad dollars. And so the target should be the companies that are paying for the show to be on. Who are the targets of the issues that we care about? And how do we have laser focus on those targets? Then how do we create multiple engagement strategies? And so we need to have crazy, ignorant, scary people. No, seriously. Think the NAACP's the NAACP Youth and College Division has in their constitution that their goal is to train an intelligent and militant youth leadership. I couldn't believe it when I was there. Why is it to train an intelligent and militant youth leadership? Because almost every single model of social justice has seen crazy, aggressive young people that scared power structures enough to force them to be willing to negotiate with senior statesmen. But void of an intelligent and militant mobilization mechanism, you got elder statesmen who trying to figure out what role they play, and nobody's scared of anybody. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it's all about grassroots mobilization, civil disobedience. It just depends on what the issue is. So if you can get the meeting, get the meeting. Because there's nothing worse than people marching on somebody they could have had a meeting with. Take the meeting first at least before you decide to march. Build broad-based coalitions and make sure that you're creating a trajectory that both has short-term goals because the goal shouldn't just be the passing of the policy. There should be education threshold goals. There should be engagement of new partners. There should be a level of literacy around the issue, all that you can try to create measurable marks for. And that creates a level of sustainable mobilization and prevents people from burning out quickly, because social justice is hard. And so if the only victory is about the passage of policy, then so often we never win. But if there are benchmarks that lead us toward a more educated population, more people engaged in the process, the ability to negotiate even lower levels of policy, so on and so forth, and we've got that into our strategy, then leaders and followers alike have the ability to understand what success looks like. And we're not just looking at this holy grail of a piece of legislation passing or the building of an infrastructure. Does that make sense? And then I would make sure that at every level you've got people who are either volunteers or paid folks to come in and do regular trainings of leadership, regular trainings of volunteers, and from everything from how to effectively communicate, how to write about the issue, to how to build mobilization strategies. The training piece I just think is so important because it's the difference between whether we do this stuff great or whether we just do the stuff with passion. So thank you all so much. I'm sure we could have more debate and discussion, but I appreciate the invitation and, more importantly, all the work that you all are doing.
Thank you again, Jeff, for joining us yet another year. Please join me again in giving him a round of applause. And at this time, I would like to invite all of the BPC planning team members to join me on stage, please.
All right, at this time, I'd like to thank all of the people here at Harvard who have supported us and who have sponsored us, provided resources for us so that we could do this and keep doing this for the past decade and into decades to come. Starting with the Center for Public Leadership, Patty Bellinger, Sharon Watson-Fuller, and Barbara Best. The Harvard Kennedy School Office of Degree Programs, Melody Jackson. The Harvard Kennedy School Office of Student Diversity and Inclusion, under Dean Martinez. The Taubman Center, Penny Turner with the Office of Institutional Diversity and Equity. The Wiener Center, the Hudgens Center for African and African American Research, Ms. Abby Wolf. The Kennedy School Student Government, President Jian Bach. The Department of African and African American Studies at the Harvard Faculty of Arts and Sciences. The Office of Career Advancement, Ms. Sharon Russell, Professor Nico Mele, and the person who helped us with our budget, Ms. Ellen Piggott.
At this time, we'd also like to thank all the people who made the logistics of today possible, including media services, facilities, our people in tech that helped with all the microphones and setup, and catering. So, thank you.
And last but definitely not least, we want to thank all the volunteers who helped out, coordinated by Michael Cleary. We have some old BPC steering committee members that were phenomenal volunteers. Thank you to everybody in the room. You guys make this conference what it is. And hopefully you guys can continue these conversations as you go back to your own communities. And like Jeff was saying, actually turn that into action. And finally, to our team, who is very passionate, very organized. Something like this, it takes 7 months to plan every week for 7 months. It didn't just happen. And I especially want to thank Marcus and Marissa, our co-chairs. They put so much energy into this, and I don't think you guys have any idea, like, just how much they put into it, dealing with so many logistical snafus, and even people just blatantly telling us that they didn't think that we could make this conference a success. So, like, from the bottom of my heart, thank all of you, because I don't want to get emotional, but this is the best thing that happens at the Kennedy School, in my opinion. But anywho, I'll let y'all.